What is up, guys? Welcome back to another GeekaWhat video, and boy have I got something special for you all today. 16 cores, 32 threads, Vega 64 and more RGB than you could ever wish for. Boy am I excited. Smash that like button because it's time for my latest PC build guide, this time featuring Threadripper. AMD's Threadripper has been with us since August and comes as their response to Intel's X99 and now X299 lineups. There are three different chips which start off at the pathetic 8-core 16-thread variant, moving up to the slightly less pathetic 12-core 24-thread 1920X, and then up to this behemoth, the 1950X 16-core 32-thread CPU. Watching the CPU tear through Cinebench with all of its 16 cores, turboing up to 4 GHz straight out of the box, is enough value for me in itself. There are some more serious, actual good use case scenarios though for a chip this powerful. For example, video editing, Premiere Pro, Davincii Resolve applications which can swallow up all of those 16 cores and actually utilise them in a really good way. After Effects is the same story as with 3D rendering in Blender, for example. They're really programs that will really thrive off having 32 threads in which to utilise. I will be covering more detailed benchmarks in a future video which you can find in the card section here, but all we need to know for now is that it's incredible. So incredible it uses AMD's brand new socket, which is absolutely huge and brings me nicely on to the next component in today's build. The new Cooler Master MA621P is one of the first new CPU coolers designed exclusively for use with AMD Threadripper. That means that the plate actually covers the entire CPU, unlike other manufacturers which are selling adapters and additional mounting hardware for older products that were originally designed for much smaller chips, the LJ1151 or AM4 designed CPUs. This cooler is going to do a much more efficient job of cooling than many other CPU coolers available that boast this Threadripper mounting support, and resembles a Hyper 212 Evo that's taken a few too many steroids and has doubled itself. Most of you will know what I mean on that one. The cooler also includes two RGB fans which would normally go around $20 a piece, and with an RRP that sits around the $80 mark, but I'll put links for different regions and retailers in the description below for up-to-date pricing. It isn't a bad price unit either. It also looks pretty cool and has a really nice design with loads of heat pipes which are going to transfer heat as quickly and efficiently as possible from your CPU up to your fins, up to your heat sinks, in order to cool the CPU as fast as possible. Next up on the parts list today is the motherboard. Now in reality, any X399 motherboard, which is the chipset you'll need for Threadripper CPUs, is going to have every feature you could possibly want to use on it. This ASUS one sits in the middle of their lineup and gives a good balance between affordability, which is actually important in this build. I mean, I know you can easily get distracted by the $4,000, $5,000, $7,000, $8,000 price tag, depending on exactly how you spec this system out, but reality, you do still want to get some good value out of a lot of the components you choose. Next up is RAM/memory that I opted for in this build. You do of course need DDR4, that goes without saying, and a faster speed kit like a 2666 or 3000 MHz variety isn't going to do you too badly at all. I opted for an RGB kit that's compatible with ASUS Aura Sync directly through the DIMM slot with no additional cables required, in a 4x8GB configuration, giving 32 gigs of DDR4. For video editing, 32 gigs for me is the sweet spot. RAM is very expensive, and it's important to note that you don't want to just be spending $3,000 on memory in this build. That's just completely stupid. If you find that this isn't quite enough, you can just go again and buy the identical kit and populate the additional slots with of course 8 DIMM slots available on this motherboard to give you 64 gigs of RAM, which most people will have trouble using all of. The RGB on this as well looks really nice. They're all addressable RGB, so you can go into great detail to how these things look if you really wish, and they're very good in terms of actual memory performance. I've been using these in my personal editing rig for quite some time and never had any reliability problems with them, never had any blue screens caused by these, any memory timing issues, and they also overclock quite well. I've got them running at 3000 MHz in the build you see here on this ASUS motherboard without a single problem. They also have red heat spreaders as well, which kind of matches, or does match, the black and red sort of overarching colour scheme of today's gaming PC. For the storage in today's build, this is a very much subjective thing and will vary depending on your needs, but here's my go-to setup. A 500GB or 1TB Samsung 960 Pro, an M.2 drive for your Windows drive, your boot drive. It's super duper fast and will fit on the motherboard really nicely. A 2.5-inch SSD. My go-to is the Kingston HyperX Savage 480GB drive. I use this for additional backups of any editing files as well as for scratch disks in editing software. This is where they're able to easily shove temporary data that they're currently using, rendered previews as well of videos for your editing software can go here as well. And there's nothing worse than losing an editing file that you spend hours on because of, say, a sporadic drive failure. Having two SSDs just gives you some failover and also gives you loads of super fast storage. I then also selected two 4TB Seagate Barracuda hard drives, 7200 RPM, the standard 3.5-inch size, for your backup for your mass storage. Many people will also have a server, as do I, and I'll link that video in the card section here. However, having some onboard mass storage does work really nicely. For the graphics in this build, I selected AMD's latest highest end GPU, it's their Vega 64, with 8GB of HBM2 memory and this superb ASUS ROG cooler on board. It isn't going to disappoint. It's also got loads of 4K DisplayPort and HDMI outputs on the rear and boasts ASUS Aura Sync, meaning the RGBs on the graphics card can sync up with the rest of the build to create a really nice cohesive looking system. For editing software such as Davincii Resolve and Premiere Pro, a high-end graphics card can be really important, especially when it comes to colour grading. If you want super smooth playback that doesn't drop any frames, but you also have some decent colour grades and visual effects on there, graphics cards can be really important. And the reason you want a high-end card is actually because of arguably poor software optimization. Rather than using the graphics card at 50% load every single second, there'll be times when your editing software will go, GPU power, I need all of it and I need it now. And that's where a high-end graphics card comes in. It can supplement all of that power and give it everything it needs in 1 second rather than 5, and that prevents the visual stuttering and the timeline stuttering as you scrub through your timeline that many people come to see and absolutely loathe. It's got loads of 4K DisplayPort and HDMI compatible outputs and ASUS's cooler on, so you can't really go wrong. For the case in this build, arguably the penultimate part, I went for Cooler Master's Master Case 500 Maker Tempered Glass Edition, or else I believe that's what it stands for. This MC500MT, as we'll call it for the time being, is stunning. It's got two tempered glass side panels, one on either side, and the tint on these actually isn't too heavy, meaning you can see inside your system and admire the build. The front I/O boasts loads of USB 3 ports, USB 3.1 Gen 2 of the Type-C variety, as well as an RGB and fan controller that work in conjunction with the Windows ASUS Aura Sync software, meaning you can use both at the same time if you wish to make the system and the process just so much more seamless. The back motherboard red plate and the RGB power supply divider just top it off with support for eATX motherboards and superb cable routing options. My full review to come, and I'll put that in the card section on release. Finally, the last main part in today's build is of course the power supply. I went for Cooler Master's V850. 850 watts is enough for this build. You don't really need any more than that, and does give some leverage for upgrades. It's fully modular with nice sleek black cables and 80+ gold certified, meaning it is super duper efficient and isn't going to waste much of the energy that it takes from the wall in terms of heat or fan noise, for example. I also selected some universal power supply sleeved extensions which top this build off really nicely and add a hint of red as well to match the rest of this case. I mean, I forgot to mention a moment ago, but the top handle on this case as well is just so gorgeous. I think that about wraps it up for today's build video though. I will of course cover detailed performance figures in an upcoming episode, which you can find, as I said, in the card section here. If you enjoyed today's video, smash that like button and subscribe, but I'll leave you on a gorgeous end montage of this PC I just can't stop looking at and can't stop using. It is incredible. See you next time.